Welcome to the Kapital News. I am your host, Alex Kreitis. Today is August 25th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope all you guys enjoyed your weekend. So in this segment of the week ahead, I believe the main focus is going to be a continuation of last Friday's focus, which of course is the trade war escalation between the U.S. and China. We did have the G7 summit meeting over there in France this weekend. Not a whole bunch of breaking news. We do have a new trade agreement, at least in principle, between the United States and Japan. And of course, Donald Trump is touting this as a big win. This is going to be great for farmers and ranchers. We're going to sell a whole bunch of more corn, all this stuff. So I guess we can anticipate with all of this increased corn sales that GDP will now be at 22.5% for the remainder of this year. So buckle up, folks. It's going to be a wild ride. Of course, that's not going to happen, but nevertheless, that's what we'll be told. Of course, that's an exaggeration. Take a joke. But it's one thing after the other. The other thing that you have to take into consideration is tariffs still exist between the U.S. and Japan, even if this deal is actually signed in a formal ceremony, which if it is signed in a formal ceremony, what we are told is it will take place, I believe, around the end of September, when there is a UN General Assembly meeting in New York City. So we'll see. That's a month away. Anything could change. They'll probably sign something. There seems to be a pretty good relationship between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan. However, this is not a panacea. This is nothing fantastic. And it's also my understanding that a large part of this deal would have existed had the TPP existed. Now, of course, Donald Trump removed the United States from the TPP, saying it was a terrible deal. And of course, maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't. But the deal that he is pretty much striking with Japan right now is very similar to what would have already existed under TPP. So it'll be something that the president and his team will obviously tout as a big win for the United States, that this is a great negotiation, this is great for American farmers and ranchers, yada, yada, yada. This will be billions and billions and billions of dollars. We hear the same song and dance all the time. I'm personally getting sick and tired of it, but that's what we're being told. This program does talk about the news, so we're going to talk about it because it has to be discussed. Now, typically right now, the markets they're unimpressed by this. They don't care about corn, and they don't care about cattle futures. They care about what's taking place between the U.S. and China. The Dow sold off over 600 points on Friday. We went through the numbers. We're talking 2 to 3 percentage point declines across the major indices. Now, if we're looking at the Asian markets as they're trading right now, they're down a couple percentage points as we speak. Commodity markets, which is something that is vitally important to these discussions between the U.S. and China, they're taking a hit. We have oil down over 1% as we're doing this podcast. Gold and silver are both up over 1%. In fact, gold is up 1.1%, now trading at $1,543 an ounce. And silver is over 1.5% as I'm doing this podcast and is trading at $17.65 an ounce. We've been telling you folks that these precious metals are undervalued. They are in the midst of a bull market run. This is still the early stages as far as I'm concerned. Can there be a pullback? Absolutely. Nothing goes straight up, nothing goes straight down. Buy the dips on these precious metals, I'm telling you. Copper, Dr. Copper, a major leading indicator, we talk about copper here all the time, is now down another percentage point. And it is trading at multi-year lows. This also is not a good indicator for future growth, which is why we focus on the price of copper here at the Kapital News. It is a strong leading indicator. So, what else took place over the weekend? Well, watching some of the Sunday morning programs, particularly Fox News Sunday, moderator Chris Wallace finally started to ask some questions that the Kapital News has been asking for months, and that is the credibility of the President of the United States and his administration. Because Donald Trump, and we focused on this was the prime focus of our podcast on Friday, the tweets heard round the world, because Donald Trump had a breakdown on Friday. It was a Twitter storm. He was upset with the Federal Reserve. He's upset with China because they raised tariffs on $75 billion worth of U.S. goods. He wanted to retaliate. He asked the question, who's the bigger enemy? Who is the bigger enemy? Chairman Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve or Chairman Xi, the president of China? Now, of course, he appointed Jerome Powell to the position he holds as chairman of the Federal Reserve. And of course, President Trump has been saying for months that he and President Xi have a great relationship. They're really good friends. They have great phone conversations with each other. President Xi sends him lovely, beautiful letters, and everything's fine. Now he is an enemy. Who's the bigger enemy? Well, Chris Wallace had Steve Mnuchin on, the Treasury Secretary, and he asked the question, point blank, Mr. Secretary, are we supposed to take the president at his word on these tweets, or how are we supposed to interpret it? This goes to the heart of credibility. This goes to the heart of my letter to the president that is written on thecapitalnews.com. Check that out. I also took the time, of course, to read that letter aloud as a podcast. You can find that on thecapitalnews.com or our YouTube channel, The Capital News. It is there to be heard, to be read. Do so, please. This all comes down to the heart of credibility. And what we've been talking about for months, the mainstream media is now finally starting to get a hold of. Because when are you supposed to take this guy serious, and when are you not? Because at the G7, the president was obviously asked a question. Are you having second thoughts about your decision in this whole trade war thing? And he said, well, I have second thoughts about everything. And that's sort of where it left off. And then it said, okay, now that caused a whole scramble with the communications team with the White House. Well, what did the president mean by that? Did he mean he didn't mean to throw on additional tariffs and he wants to walk them back? Oh, no. Now they're digging in even deeper. No. What the president meant to say was he would have added even more tariffs if he had thought about it a little bit longer. So nothing's stopping him. So does that mean this is going to be further escalation? That's really what the president wants to do? I mean, we can joke around that, he calls himself the king of Israel or the chosen one, whatever. I know he's joking. Okay, I understand that's tongue-in-cheek. He's joking around. That really doesn't necessarily bother me. It's the whole host of other things that does, however, because these are serious questions. What's the credibility of the President of the United States? What he says carries a lot of weight. So when he tweets, because he loves to communicate with the people through Twitter, are we supposed to believe him or are we not? Because the markets move one way or the other. Countries make decisions one way or the other. I mean, this is the game that is being played. I personally don't like it. I do not want to sit here and witness this type of crap for another 5 years, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't. This is not what I voted for. Not even close. I didn't vote for $23 trillion worth of debt and rising. I didn't vote for the art of the deal to be, let's make a deal with the Democrats to blow up the national debt. That is not what I voted for. Not for a second. I did not vote for the United States to spend $2.1 trillion on national defense over the past 3 years. Didn't do it. When that $700 billion a year. $700 billion a year on national defense. We outspend the next 7 or 8 countries combined, and most of those countries are our allies. So what are we doing? Where is all this money going? Is it all accounted for? I don't think so. In fact, I know it isn't. So what's going on here? This is not what I voted for. Is this what you voted for? Where are the fiscal conservatives? Where are the people that are supposed to be taking this stuff seriously? We were also told that trade wars are easy to win. Well, this is going on a year and a half, and it's escalating. And the clock is running thin for Donald Trump because he has to worry about an election in 2020, which I think is part and parcel for why he had his mini breakdown on Twitter. Again, the president is under a lot of stress. I understand this. I respect this. If you want to have a little mini temper tantrum, you want to have a little breakdown, don't do it on Twitter. Do it in front of your staff. Go in the private residence in the White House and do it in front of your wife. Don't do it in front of the rest of the world. Don't make the rest of the American people look like, what the hell did these people do voting this guy in? I voted for him. So, I mean, this isn't what I voted for. I didn't vote for these many breakdowns on Twitter. I didn't vote for saying that, China is paying all of these tariffs. They're just writing checks for billions and billions of dollars to the U.S. Treasury, which is not true. I did not vote to have farmers going bankrupt in record numbers. This isn't what I voted for. I didn't vote for farmer bailouts. I didn't vote for steel tariffs and all this other crap. Not what I voted for. It's not what I want. And it's not working. It is not working. Because here's the other thing that we have to take in consideration. What happens if China is willing to say, you know what? We're not going to be so concerned with our GDP figures anymore. We're not going to be so concerned anymore. We're playing the long game here. Donald Trump has 18 months and he's got to worry about where he's going to be. China, President Xi, nope, he's there. He's a strong man. He's there. He doesn't really have to worry about this stuff. And they could say, you know what? We're going to put GDP on the back burner and we're going to put patriotism and nationalism ahead of GDP in China. And if China does that, if they make that move, we're in a lot of trouble here in the United States. Because they may be willing to take the economic hit. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I am not supporting China. Not for a second. I also believe they are going to be in for a rude awakening as well. I think they are rather arrogant in believing that they can handle any type of economic situation. They can't. They're in a lot of trouble, believe me when I tell you. But that doesn't mean that that's good news for us here in the United States either. Because you have to understand and respect the interconnectedness of everything. And if China goes down, the rest of the world will go down with it. To what degree, that'll be argued, and that'll be obviously realized as we make our way through that. Same thing with the United States. If the United States goes down, the rest of the world's going down. The rest of the world is already going down. It's already rolling over. Europe, for all intents and purposes, is in recession. China is at 27-year lows on GDP. The United States is not at 3%. We just had revisions. Remember we talked about the jobs revisions, 500,000 fewer jobs? Well, GDP wasn't at 3% either. It was at 2.5. Okay, so we don't have these fantastic numbers. We just don't. And then the president to come out and call for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, it ain't a panacea, folks. Europe has negative interest rates and quantitative easing, and they've been doing it for a decade, and they're going in recession. So you can't come out and say, well, if the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates and does quantitative easing, that we're going to get away from a recession. It doesn't work that way. Talk about this here all the time. Lower interest rates, quantitative easing is not a panacea. Monetary policy is not a panacea. It is the problem. So that's what I'm concerned about now. I was concerned about the credibility of the President of the United States and how China would start talking, because it was all one-sided. It was all Donald Trump. It was all his administration. Talking. Everything's going great. We're in the final laps. We're going to have a signing ceremony. Of course, none of that was true. There's escalations in tariffs. There's escalation in rhetoric. The Chinese are slow playing us now. There was a truce. There was no new deadline. We were told that the Chinese were promising to buy more U.S. agricultural products. Now they've halted all U.S. agricultural products and have even increased more tariffs on them. So who to believe? Who to believe? That was my whole point. Because if and when the Chinese started talking, and if they were to contradict Donald Trump, who would the markets believe? Well, when you start to see these markets sell off, and when you have on one side Donald Trump and his administration saying everything's fine, and then on the other you see an escalation, well, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe everything's fine, or are you going to believe the actions, not just by the Chinese, but by the President of the United States as well, in retaliating and increasing tariffs as well? You going to believe the words or the actions? Because they're not the same. They're not the same. So who do you believe? I have to go with the actions, unfortunately. But that's what we have to go by. And that's what we're going to continue to go by. But that's my concern now. Will the Chinese start to dig in and they say, you know what? We'll take the hit. We don't care if it's a couple years, because if it's a couple years for us, it's going to be a couple years for the United States as well. And we might come out, from the Chinese perspective, maybe they think they're going to come out smelling like a rose on the other side. Maybe they think they'll be top dog, at least economically speaking, once the dust settles and everything goes away, and then they can start to rebuild. Because if you look at the infrastructure, it's not even close. It's not even close. Amtrak can't take a turn at 60 miles an hour. They got maglev trains over there going 200 miles an hour from major city to major city. So, I mean, from an infrastructure standpoint, it's not even close. Now you have a whole bunch of manufacturing over there. You have a whole bunch of AI. You have a whole bunch of students that come over here to the United States, get trained by the best universities, and then they leave and they go back. What a joke. What a joke. I mean, this is not good for the United States of America, ladies and gentlemen. It's not good at all. So you have to pay attention to this closely. And again, my hat's off to Chris Wallace. I mean, he's a few months late as far as I'm concerned, asking about the credibility. When do you trust this president? This is the whole problem, because it's not just Donald Trump and the Trump organization. This is President Donald Trump in the United States of America. He speaks on our behalf. So if he is not credible, that says we, the American people, are no longer credible. That's how serious this is. Now, you may disagree with that. You may not think that. You may think I'm being too serious about this issue, but I'm not. Because this sets a huge precedent that this guy can say what he wants. Nobody cares. Well, then what's the point of the presidency? I mean, because the other thing that I'm somewhat frightened over is the fact that the president in his Twitter, what do I want to say here? His tweet storm, was calling out to say, I hereby order U.S. companies to start looking for alternatives to China. And then the president pulls out an obscure law back from 1977, some sort of Emergency Economics Act. So this is what this tells me. If the president is aware of this act, then this is something that the president and his team have been thinking about. This has been an option on their table. Now, you can say, okay, well, that's fine. You do want the administration to look at all options. So I don't have a problem with that. But I have a problem with how the president pulled this card out of the deck. I have a problem with the president thinking that this is actually something that he's going to do. Because is the president going to be willing to take the economic hit? Because you do not change supply chains at a drop of a hat, especially when it comes to heavy manufacturing. You don't just say, well, we're going to leave China and come back to the United States. Because also on these Sunday morning programs, we had, or maybe it was just another segment somewhere along the day, but you had another advisor to the president pretty much saying, yeah, that's what we want. We want companies to start looking around. Well, who is the administration to dictate to corporate America what they can and cannot do? Small business, medium-sized business, large business. That's not how this works here. That's not how this works. To dictate to them how to run their business. That's what China does to their companies. That's not what we do here in the United States of America. So I have a lot of concerns about this. A lot of concerns. And I hope you do too, because this is somewhat of a breakdown, I think, from the president over the weekend, at least on Friday. Now they're in damage control, trying to calm everything down. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens this week, especially tomorrow. What kind of tweets are we going to see? What kind of statements are we going to say where everything is fine? The Chinese are coming over. We're going to have conversations. We're going to have tea and birthday cake, and everything's going to be fine. And we're going to see what the markets do. But right now, the Japanese markets are down 2.25%. Right now, the Chinese markets are down 1%. Right now, the South Korean market is down 1.5%. Right now, the Hong Kong markets are down 3%. All going back to where they were weeks ago. So, I mean, you can say that this is fine. You can say that this is what you want. This is not what I want. This is not what I voted for. I did not vote for farm bailouts. I did not vote for farmers to be filing record bankruptcies. I did not vote for $23 trillion in national debt. I did not vote for $2.1 trillion to be spent on a military-industrial complex that is out of control. This isn't what I voted for. I don't know if it's what you voted for, but I'm going to have a very difficult time voting for this president again in 2020. I can tell you that right now. Voting for a Democrat is all but off the table because these people are lunatics. They can identify a whole bunch of problems. Their solutions are absolutely terrible. We don't need them here in this country. I don't think a lot of them would get passed because I would think that the Republicans will probably hold one of the houses of Congress, and so they would have a tough time getting a lot of their agenda through. But nevertheless, it almost doesn't make any difference. It almost doesn't make any difference. And that's the sad thing, because you're either going to have 4 or 5 more years of this, or you're going to have most likely some sort of lunatic on the left, whether that be Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or somebody else out of the woodwork. I don't think Joe Biden's going to do it. I just don't. The guy doesn't know where he is. I told him months ago, go back to Delaware and take a nap, call it a day. He ain't listening to me. That's fine. He can continue to make himself look like an ass. He's been doing it for 30 years. What's another 18 months? But we'll see what happens. I mean, the week ahead is going to be primarily focused on these trade talks. It's going to be volatile in the market. It's going to be volatile in the politics. I'd like to see some of these Republicans come out and question this president and say something is wrong here. And we're starting to see that. We have a few contenders now throwing their hat into the ring to challenge Donald Trump. We'll see how far that goes. Of course, I'm sure the liberal mainstream media is going to eat that up. They're going to look for any type of distraction they can. They're going to look for any type of division that they can within the Republican Party, especially anything that deals with Donald Trump. But, Donald Trump brought a lot of this on himself. He doesn't have to say the things he says. He doesn't have to tweet the things he tweets, but he does. He pushes the envelope at times when he doesn't have to do it, at times when he knows it is going to be more divisive than it is something that is going to unify this country. And we are at a juncture in this country, as it is around the rest of the world, where everybody is on pins and needles, and we need more unification, not more division. And so there are times where I applaud the president and his efforts, and there are times where I criticize him. Mostly on today's podcast, it's criticism. Unfortunately, more recently, it's been criticism. But there hasn't been much to applaud of this man and his administration. The lies and exaggerations when it comes to tariffs and trade, the deal with the Democrats to blow up the national deficits and national debt. I mean, these are huge. These are huge. To continue to attack the Federal Reserve, which is fine with me, but then to call for more lower interest rates and quantitative easing, I can't have that. So, if there's something that you want me to applaud this president on, send me a note. And if I agree with you, I'll do so. But right now, the actions that I'm seeing and the words that I am hearing from this president and his administration are not things that I'm going to defend just because I voted for him. So that's the week ahead. It's going to be more volatility. U.S.-China trade talks will be front and center. Federal Reserve policy will be front and center. More words from central bankers will be front and center. So typically it's par for the course. I think we're just going to see a little bit more volatility. But we'll see what happens during the rest of the week. So stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Kapital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.